Hello, good morning to you all. Welcome to Sunrise Daily. Today, I'm Chamberlain. What's up?
Indeed, it's a beautiful... What day are we now?
I was going to remind us.
No,
I always wait for him on that one.
He reminds us of the date, but I know it's a Wednesday morning. I mean, I'm horrible with dates,
Midweek.
But I don't do badly with days. And thank you so much for joining us. I'm Maokpe Ogunyusuf.
Well, yeah, it's a Wednesday morning, and it's October 18. Yeah, for those of you who don't always remember your dates. Amaya Makide, good morning and welcome. Well, it's...
Maybe we're going to extend you being our alarm clock at this rate. If you keep up like this, look, I think I have to do something about this alarm clock matter. It's giving me problems, man. Problems.
Well, I think maybe...
I might need the brother's help.
Essentially...
No comments. Behind the scenes, I will speak.
Essentially, what you're saying is that you want someone to keep you accountable, and that's a good thing, you know. It's the job of the media, which sometimes it's good to celebrate a thing or two, you know, that happen around us. So it is cheering to learn, for instance, that the Minister of Solid Minerals went to somewhere in Nasarawa State to commission what he calls, what has been an investment of an international company, a Chinese company actually, constructing a $250 million lithium processing plant in the state. Now, the underlying thing which the minister said, Mr. Dele Alake, is that the core of his own initiative as a minister in the Ministry of Solid Minerals is value addition. The days, according to him, of exporting our raw materials are over. And it's very exciting, guys. I mean, so just imagine, I mean, he has gone out once to say the value of solid minerals in Nigeria goes something in the region of $700 billion. Now, that is a lot. But having to export all of that, as opposed to long-term thinking of value addition in the country, it is something that should be celebrated and should be encouraged. Now, where the battle might be is in the localities. Of course, mineral deposits are found mostly in localities in rural Nigeria. The conversation with the states to ensure that the needful is not only done, but are seen to be done, that's another thing altogether. Lithium, gosh, is what they make batteries with. And so that's just one of several things. I've had this thing being said also, that there's a valuable resource in Nigeria, solid mineral in Nigeria called gum arabic. Gum arabic is used to make a good number of soft drinks, you know, carbonated drinks that we have in the country and all over the place. So one wonders, you know, how far-reaching this will go all across board. This is something to celebrate, if you ask me, guys. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to do, you know, make value addition the core of everything that we do. The one that we have to export petroleum products every time and lose the value-added services, the value-added products that should come out of them. It's huge. Petrol, diesel, kerosene, they are little compared to other things that should come out of these things. Tablets, phones, phone covers, all things rubber and plastics. A good number of them come from these petrochemical products that are byproducts of, you know, petrol after, you know, those ones have been removed. So is there a thinking in this direction as well, particularly in the oil industry in the country, to ensure value addition is not only a core objective in the Ministry of Solid Minerals, but across board, including agriculture, guys?
Oh, well, I can definitely say that it's a good thing that, I mean, we've heard, and we always hear it in whispers, that, oh, part of the reason why we've seen a low level of conflict, which is now beginning to escalate in many parts, is as a result of the resources, the many abundant resources that Nigeria is blessed with. And that, you know, these have now caused conflict, you know, in some parts, sponsored in part by international actors because they want to be able to get to the resources in those places. Take, for instance, Zamfara. We understand that part of the reason why, I mean, apart from, of course, you know, natural resources, and by natural resources or scarcity of natural resources, I'm talking about water and fodder for cattle. The part of the reason why we've seen consistent levels of insecurity, which has escalated in such a way that perhaps only parts of Gusau are now habitable, is because of the gold, the big and heavy gold deposits in Zamfara, and that, you know, part of the conflict, or a huge part of it, has been fueled by international actors who want to just be able to carry away, cart away our natural resources without paying anything for it. And so it is heartwarming to see that there is an international actor that is planning to do the right thing by the people of not just Nasarawa State, but by the people of Nigeria. And I think that's the sort of investment that needs to be encouraged. I think that we need to look into our processes to find out how easy are we making it for international investors to come into this country. There's been plenty of talk around it. We've seen, will I say, international travels in recent times, which is supposed to, you know, help market the potential that is present in our country, especially in the solid minerals sector. I think the solid minerals minister has been quoted as saying that Nigeria has absolutely has no business with being broke, because the solid minerals sector alone has the capacity to be able to, you know, fund this country's budget in many respects. And even state governments shouldn't be left out of it. So while this is commendable, I think that there needs to be an intentionality to intensify efforts to identify those places that have now been, you know, earmarked as hotbeds of conflict as a result of the mineral deposits in those places. North central Nigeria is becoming quite notorious, and this is particularly precarious for us because the north central region of the country is also one of the very big food baskets. It's the major food basket of this country, you know, serving both the core north and also the core south. And that's not to say that, I mean, you know, the northern parts of the country isn't, you know, serving us. But when you go to some north central states, the variety of foods they are able to plant will just leave your mouth agape. When you look at what has happened in Benue State, for instance, and some of the conflicts that we've seen there, only a few days ago on the news at 10, we had reports of what has happened in places like Kwande local government area of Benue State. And we're told, our reporters were able to see that, you know, Kwande has now been, you know, cited as one of the places where there are huge gold deposits in Benue State. Kwande has also suffered a very, very terrible attack of insecurity. You know, many communities in those places have been rendered desolate as a result of this conflict. A lot of the people are now living in internally displaced persons camps. And you now begin to put two and two together. So I want to imagine that there should be a very concerted, very deliberate, a very intentional plan on the part of the National Security Advisor, looking at the places where we're suffering internal security crisis, understanding that in respect to what exactly, to our geospatial mapping, maybe as provided by the Ministry of Solid Minerals. I think about two ministries that are correlated. Sometimes I'm a little confused. There's mines and steel, but I think mines and steel is another one. But as provided for by Solid Minerals, and to see whether these conflicts are in any way related. If they are, is there a way we can bring the actors who might be interested in, I'm not saying we should reward bad behavior, don't get me wrong, but is there a way to ensure that the people who really want to mine in those places, you know, can be brought to the table and told, look, this is legal business. this is business that if you want to do, the state will support you. The state governments too should be very much involved in this because it is their resources. And nobody wants a situation that we have faced in the Niger Delta for so long. Don't also forget that in the Niger Delta, I think only recently in the House of Reps, they've now raised an issue about how even the, is it 2 or 3% that is supposed to go to the host communities as enshrined in the PIA, beg your pardon, has not been paid to those communities and is right now beginning to cause some agitations. But we shouldn't get to where we got to in the Niger Delta before we begin to incorporate the state government and the host communities that have these mineral resources. It should be to the benefit of the people. And I'm hoping that what it is that the Solid Minerals Minister went to Nasarawa to do should be a guiding light of sorts, should be an example that this is what is possible, you know, at the end of the day. And let us hope that we will see many more of it. Because, I mean, how can a country be so blessed yet unable to achieve its full potential? It's a question that should boggle our mind every day. And each of us in our own little situations should continue to find solutions to help this country achieve its potential. Chairman.
Well, yes, indeed. I mean, much as it's a good thing, we love to see this kind of venture and initiatives take root and then, of course, grow, expand, and bear a lot of fruit. But, you know, we like to see them take a little step further. It's also interesting to see that, yes, the ministry did say they will ensure they collaborate with customs so that you don't get illegal smuggling of certain other mineral resources in the guise of this. And then I also are interested to see what we do with some of these companies who come in here as foreign investors, whether or not they comply with regulation, labor laws in this country. Because we do have and consistently receive a lot of messages about how some of the workers there are not being treated well. Incidentally, some of those complaints come from Chinese companies that are operating in this country. So we need to look into that and ensure that that kind of scenario does not repeat itself. And then, what's going to happen? I mean, are we paying equal attention to indigenous investors to boost their capacity? Because at the end of the day, we all equally want them to be as strong and competitive globally. Because, yes, all the value chain of mining and exporting this product, we need to strengthen ourselves here. And I hope we're not going to see the kind of scenario we see in the oil and gas industry where time and again you see they just talk about how they've seized some illegal refineries, they burn those things. I don't know if they pay attention to what happens to the environment. What are we going to do to, because they do have, the same ministry spoke about some of those illegal mining areas in this country. What are we doing with all of those? So it will be focused on. We hope that we'll pay a lot of attention and make sure the law is the law. No matter whose ox is gold, you have to comply with the regulations that exist here in this country if you have to do business with us here. So, yes, you got a license, you're going to do all of these things, but don't do anything untoward. Regulatory agencies, hope you have the capacity to ensure that you stand where, draw the line where you need to, and ensure that things go well. Because, I mean, after all, if it's worth doing, we have to do it well. Okay, so let's take a look at the Guardian newspaper as we take you through some of the dailies here today. Look at what the Guardian leads with. 2023 elections by court order. INEC's credibility sinks as 94% contested posts awaits tribunal. Wow, it's a whooping 94%. So they've got a table here about the 2023 general elections overview. So, yeah. Which one? The headline? The INEC credibility sinks, not stinks, sinks as 94% contested posts awaits tribunal. And some of them are already being adjudicated, being decided. I mean, the latest being that of Senator Abo, even though he says it's not about the court cases, it's about the president of the Senate who's behind my ouster, but the president in turn returned and says, look, I don't know what you're talking about. So 1,280 political offices were contested in 2023.
People say, inexplicable thing. Why these results are being contested are another thing. And I think that those two should be separated for interrogation. Because the fact that you lost doesn't mean, sometimes when you also look at the cases that are in court, they might not be exactly about the elections. They might be about qualification. We've seen those controversies in Enugu. We've seen it in, I'm trying to see which other state has that particular problem. Some people will say, well, maybe that's also INEC's problem.
Yeah, qualification is INEC's problem.
You have to be able to, but does INEC have to go and verify, results or whatever certificates that you bring? Would that be under INEC's purview? To go doing those kinds of jobs. I'm just looking at, for instance, what happened in Bayelsa, where the governor, the person who was returned elected, didn't have a problem with his own certificate. It was his deputy who had it, according to the Supreme Court. And, that he never got sworn in. So in that situation where there was no problem with the election, or, and it was with the qualification, would that also be on INEC's credibility?
Well, those are some of the things that several people have spoken about, which we'll also take a look at here today in the course of the program, by the way, so you may need to just stay here with us on that particular matter. But, okay, we'll keep the gunpowder dry so that when we do come to that point, we'll raise some of these issues. But you also remember, 2015 was the very first time, the Guardian also highlighted here, where Nigeria's presidential election did not end up in court. So, and then they ask about
not because they didn't try. There are a number of things. there was a backstory to that, but I think that there's a reason why President Goodluck Jonathan is now the biggest ambassador for peace on the continent. I saw him very recently in Liberia, and Liberian journalists wanted to know what he was going to do to exert his influence on the political leaders. Yes, I have that video. I think it aired right here on our station. They want to know what he was going to do, and that role is still very important. It does appear that the elections in Liberia are headed to a runoff. There's going to be a second round because it doesn't appear that any of the candidates so far has been able to achieve the required constitutional requirement, which is 50% plus one. So it'll be very interesting. There is a backstory to that, but I think that politicians need to take a second look at themselves in the mirror.
And when we speak about those reforms, if in the case of a certificate, maybe the deputy didn't get it and then they kicked both of them out, should it just end there? Because if...
there should be consequences.
It doesn't be tantamount to lying under oath.
Yeah, there should be consequences. Forgery.
Yeah, so that's Guardian today anyway.
I'm spoiled for choice. I'm a little...
Oh,
yes. I like what I see here on the front pages of both the Vanguard. So let me just run you through the Vanguard. Let's go with the Vanguard first. And you see there's fresh trouble in Senate as Akpabio Ndume clash. Ndume kicks against Akpabio's alleged procedural errors, storms out. Senate President convenes closed session to address colleagues. Akpabio bears no ill will against colleagues, is according to an aide. Senators head to Uyo for retreat today. Okay, I don't think it's any surprise that they headed to the Senate President's house. But hey, this happened where the chief whip was ruled out of order.
And stormed out.
He's the one who calls people to order.
Now, he himself was out of order?
No.
It's rude to be out of order.
Well, if you're calling the Senate President to order...
and then he calls you to order too.
Exactly. You have to remember that he wields the gavel. And he can rule you out of order. Well, it was a mild drama from what we understand. Page 5 is where you find the details. And it does appear that later on, Senator Ndume joined the Senate plenary session. There are a number of other stories right here. South Africa may overtake Nigeria as Africa's biggest economy. That's according to IMF. Will there be any surprises there? Tinubu nominate. Well, there will be, because, come on, we're more in number.
So there's galloping inflation here. We're trying to grapple with it.
Oh, they also have that too, but it looks like they're more productive than we are. So let's face our reality. Tinubu nominates Musa Aliyu as ICPC Chairman. Is that a balancing act? That is right there. Looking at the sports, which I'm going to highlight in a moment. I think that's what really fascinated me with this one. CBN to penalize banks with check processing errors from November 1. Okay, page 19 is where you'll get details. What exactly the backstory to that is, you'll have to read page 19 to see the details of that.
What about charges, legal charges, CBN? What's happening to that one? We need to know. Quick, too.
Yes, I guess they've heard you. Maybe there'll be a response to that. Tinubu flags of cash transfer program for 15 million households, and there's still this conversation. Obi-Wan 2023 presidential poll, Babachio Lawal, ex-SGF, is speaking. Ondo, Oshun, Akwa Ibom, Abia commit to clear arrears. This is as a result of Vanguard special report on pension. Please, let's do better by our pensioners. But sports, how can we forget? Here's the all-time great. That's how they spelled that. Messi beats Haaland Mbappe to 8th Ballon d'Or. I know that a lot of people will be wondering. Wow. It's right there on the front page. And what I find interesting is how they spell the great. It's not the G-R-E-A-T, it's G-R-E-I-G-H-T. So, a very interesting way. Let's leave it there for Vanguard newspapers.
It's for him.
Daily Independent is towing the same line in one way or the other with its lead story this morning. FG's cash transfer targets 15 million households to gob 1.125 trillion naira. It goes back to that question that we've been asking. Which social register is being used? 25,000 naira to each household is what we understand, and that will amount to 75,000 naira for each family across 3 months. So, again, transparency, and Chamberlain, you talked about accountability earlier. Well, here it is again. At the bottom of that picture, senators take sides as Senate President Akpabio Ndume clash. The details of that you'll find on the inside pages. Labour Party tackles FG over 57.6 billion naira SUVs for 360 reps. Story you'll find on page 29, among several other stories. AMCON clarifies secondment of Arik Air staff to NG Eagle. Have we heard the last of that? Our members not complaining, according to NAPE. Arik Air fleet depletes to 2 aircraft. Whoa. Perhaps some clarification might be good because, well, maybe further clarification might be good because some people, I think it was in the dailies yesterday or the day before yesterday, some people were actually complaining about the intervention of AMCON in that airline up until this moment. But I guess time will tell the rest. AGF, AFDB to unlock $5 billion financing for women SMEs. Unveil Nigeria's Fawa financiers. That story is on page 6. Women SMEs, that's good. One of them is in Abuja. That's Daily Independent this morning.
Okay, take a look at Leadership newspaper next. Varsity autonomy. Fear of high school fees grips parents, students. Government shifting responsibility, commercializing education. This is ascribed to stakeholders. Say new fee regime burdensome, no tuition policy deceptive. As to distance itself from fee hike. Yeah, I mean, are they the ones that usually hike it? They're teachers and lecturers. So, well, maybe they're trying to tell you they didn't agree with it, but look, they're not. It's all here for you, anyways, if you want to see what's going on there. FG pays 135 billion naira electricity subsidy to stop tariff hike. Oh, okay. I know. The next question is, are we going to sustain this? If we're paying this money to stop tariff hike, what does that actually mean? Look, there are just several questions here about this. It says that, well, this much was indicated by the NERC, the Electricity Regulatory Company. But you know, they always talk about the service charter. If they're supposed to provide a certain amount of electricity for a certain amount of time, and then that doesn't happen, what obligation and responsibilities do they have? Because they'll charge you and bill you anyways, and it's almost as though you have no option because they seem to hold the knife in the arm. You have to pay or they cut you off. So when they don't supply, and what about those who are supposed to be in Band A and they find themselves in Band C or something like that, and they're being charged for being on Band A, so to speak? Estates who don't even pay attention and check. I've seen that happen in several areas, so, which is why people should go ahead and check. And
I'm glad that you said estates, and I think that will be the low-hanging fruit here.
Yeah,
the solution that people need to be able to organize themselves into communities, to be able to reap the rewards of this. Because if you decide to do it as an individual,
it'll be tough.
It'll be very tough. But if you are doing it as a group, because electricity is oftentimes served in communities, even though sometimes people make a joke and say it's only in Nigeria that when there's no light in your house, you go out first to see if your neighbor doesn't have. You know? But usually, electricity is served in communities, so you should be taking for granted that if there is a general fault, I mean, if it's affecting you, it's also affecting your neighbor. If you're being overcharged, your neighbor obviously too can be overcharged. So for you to be able to get a solution and get it quickly, it will make a lot of sense for communities to be able to organize so that they can make rightful demands of their distributor and also of the NERC.
That's leadership this morning.
Oh, okay. So I still have New Telegraph. And look at that. Bayelsa, Imo, Kogi, Guba, court orders hindering our preparations. That's according to INEC. So INEC is also speaking. Says commission dealing with over 11 pre-poll court orders. There's uncertainty over participating candidates, parties, blames challenges on lack of internal party democracy. Page 3 is where you get to see details of this. But there's something to certainly worry about. And I think that, you know, just yesterday while Yaga Africa was reading its brief, one of the things that came to the fore was the fact that ballot papers in Liberia has both the picture of the candidates and the party logos.
And heavens didn't fall.
Heavens didn't fall.
Okay.
In the presidential elections,
Africa.
let me even make you,
nice.
let me shock you a bit more. They had not just the logos, they had the picture of the president and the picture of the vice president on the ballot paper. Yes. And then they had the box where you could. I mean, it has its advantage and its disadvantage, but I think that the advantage far outweighs, you know, the disadvantage. So the question for us here is, why don't we have that? And part of the reason we've been told is this pre-poll court orders that, you know, that litigations happen up until the last minute. And so it makes it very difficult for you to even know who the actual candidate is.
Does it happen in all the cases, all the candidates, all the elections, every stage? The answer is no.
But when it does happen, it has the capacity to invalidate an entire process.
But we'll make provisions. We'll provide for it.
So
nothing is impossible. No, they shouldn't give us that.
So, I mean, these are, as you said, let's keep the gunpowder dry. But
yeah.
These are some of the observations that came to the fore. And as I said again, our politicians, I think somebody was saying that, you know, they are the greatest beneficiaries of our democracy and its biggest problems. So they need to take a second look at themselves in the mirror. I mean, not exonerated the electoral body. It has to do better, far much better than it's doing. But
public service looks more attractive. The reps, Senate.
It's not as attractive as Liberia. let me just tell you, if there's anything, first, let me tell you, Nigeria, if you're elected, now I'm not exactly sure of the perks in office, but this I know, you're elected as a lawmaker, you're elected for a duration of 9 years. Oh yes, you heard that.
9 years.
Talk about incentives.
No, we're not bringing that part to Nigeria. It's the picture on the ballot that we're talking about. So,
Page 3 is where you'll get details now. The story again is Bayelsa Imo Kogi Group court orders hindering our preparations. That's according to INEC. Check CBN to penalize banks for MICR. That is right there. IMF, South Africa. No, I'm not going to read that again. South Africa overtaking us. Hey, calm down, IMF. A number of other stories right here, which I'll leave you to do. But this story, I think we should pay a little more attention to it. Exported products rejected by EU, causing Nigeria huge shame. That's according to NAFDAC. I know she says they've been able to bring it down now to about 50%. Look right here, look at that right there. Approves use of Gardasil vaccines for cervical cancer. That was a big one as well. Pages 29 and 30 will give us details. Let's leave it there for New Telegraph.
Yeah, that ends a look at the dailies then. So we're back in just a moment. We'll talk about some of these scenarios with the courts and more. So stay on with us.
Well, thank you so much for staying with us. This morning we have with us to discuss one of the issues, lined up for us this morning. The appointment of the chiefs of the anti-corruption agencies, the ICPC and the EFCC. We have with us here this morning Mr. Wahab Shitu, who is a senior advocate of Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Again, my pleasure to be here.
Let's begin with... I don't want to call it the elephant in the room because I don't think it's so big anymore. Before we go to the issue of the EFCC, the ICPC chairman that's just been appointed or announced by the president, awaiting confirmation by the Senate. What do you make of all of the furore over the qualification or not of the EFCC chairman?
Well, I think, in my view, our focus this time around is how to rebuild the economy, how to advance our democracy, how to raise living standards, and how to support this president to deliver on his mandate. And so we should not allow for distractions at this point in time. And I'm saying that because the job of nation building is a dynamic process. And law itself operates for the benefit of the society. And so when we take a view, we should look at the overall objectives. For instance, I've seen a lot of debate by eminent jurists over this furore that has been generated over the appointment of the new chairman of EFCC. I've read the views and I've listened to my very erudite friend, Daniel Buala. I've also listened to Mande Ubani. In fact, my senior friend, Femi Falana, has also expressed their views. All these are views in the public space because of their patriotic concerns. But my own perspective is to look at the EFCC Act itself as a broad legislation. What is the EFCC Act designed to achieve? The EFCC Act is designed to combat corruption, economic and financial crimes. And when we are talking of economic and financial crime, it has a lot of perspectives. We are talking of investigation. We are talking of intelligence gathering. We are talking of prosecution. We are talking of deployment of technical assistance. We are talking of international cooperation. So because corruption is not just local, it's an international thing. And so the focus should be who can do the job, who can deliver on all of these mandates. When we were talking of the appointment of the chairman, not issues about whether somebody is qualified or not qualified. Of course, as far as the appointment of this recent person is concerned, the issue of qualification is not even there because the man is eminently qualified.
So all of those issues being raised by Mr. Buala that you listen to, you don't see?
Mr. Buala's view focuses on literal interpretation of a statute, using the ordinary words employed by the draftsman in construing a statute. The question to ask is there the only method of interpreting a statute? Of course, Mr. Buala will also agree with me that is literal interpretation of statutes is not the only option that we available to anyone who wants to interpret a statute. We have the literal interpretation of statute. We have the golden rule of interpretation. We have the mischief rule of interpretation. Of course, we also have the purposive approach to interpretation of statutes or constitutional provisions, which looks at the overall legislative intent, the overall objective of the enactment, the purpose the enactment was enacted to serve. Now, if you look at it in all these broader contexts, will you say a lawyer is not concerned about investigation? Is not concerned about prosecution? Is not concerned about law enforcement? He's a law enforcement officer. Again, the approach is that we also must agree with the fact that in this dispensation, we are blessed with an Attorney General of the Federation that is seasoned, that is experienced, that is exposed, that is bold, and that has a track record. I don't see the president of this country taking a decision to appoint the chairman of EFCC without consulting with the Attorney General.
So all those arguments...
So the Attorney General of the Federation has spoken in favor of the appointment. Because I assume that that kind of appointment cannot... I even sought audience with him, and he confirmed that he was consulted and that he is in support of the appointment.
So all those conversations or arguments about cognate experience...
Okay, we are talking of cognate experience. Will you say Ola Olukoyede, a seasoned fraud expert, consultant, somebody who has served as a chief of staff in that law enforcement agency, somebody who has served as secretary to the commission in that law enforcement agency? And let me also make a clarification. Ola Olukoyede was never indicted. In the same way, Ibrahim Magu was never indicted in that panel. Did you see the report? Did you see any white paper? No one was indicted. It was just a needless exercise.
So how about the suspension 2 times along with the management?
That suspension, if you are suspended pending investigation, and then you are eventually cleared, where is the issue? I'm aware that Olukoyede has been cleared of any complicity, of any allegation, and I'm saying it publicly. The office of the Chief of Staff and Secretary to the has cleared Olukoyede of any complicity. But my worry is not even the appointment of Olukoyede. My worry is about frequent changes in the appointment of chairman of anti-graft agency. We send, very negative signals. And I think the government should worry about it.
We'll definitely come to that because that.
But as for qualification,
yes.
As for qualification, Olukoyede is eminently qualified. He's a lawyer of 22 years standing, and that is his focus area. He's an expert in intelligence gathering. He is an expert in in the combat of corruption. So I don't see any issue. The issue is, of course, the man who is acting has also delivered, Chuko. And I believe people like that also should be carried along by Olukoyede. Olukoyede should come there to AFCC to carry everybody along and reward those officers who are daily making a lot of sacrifices to ensure that we combat corruption.
Well, you talked about the frequent changes, yes. And there's, while we were having the conversation yesterday, my colleague Malpe was pointing to the fact that, was it Mr. Monday Obani was saying that both the appointment and exit of the chairman of the EFCC have almost always been laden with one, rift, one confusion, one argument, such as we're having now, or the other. But talking about the exits of his predecessors, what are the slippery slopes that he should avoid? How exposed is he or rather, I think I've asked you this question again, this question before. How vulnerable or exposed is the office of the chairman of the EFCC in particular? We'll come to the ICPC shortly. That makes it so easy for them to fall into these traps, that had made it easy for them to fall into these traps until now. And how do we ensure that this doesn't happen again sustainably?
The law of financial inducement and the character of the person. I think mainly we have all these frequent changes, not necessarily because these individuals, some of them are compromised. No. It has to do with vested interest of the ruling elite. For instance, how committed is the ruling elite itself to the fight against corruption beyond lip service? You cannot fight corruption. There's no political will on the part of the leadership. So every EFCC chairman who wants to survive must read the body language of the ruling elite. It's a survival thing. It's just like, for instance, if look at channels, the way channels is professionally and efficiently run. Because John Momo, your chairman, offers a free hand to all of you to do your job professionally. That is what should happen. The president and those should give the chairman of EFCC free hand to operate. So
let me just make this.
The question is, are they giving free hand?
You have operated within the system for a while.
Yes.
So
since inception, I've been there, so I know.
Quite valid.
Yes.
Your opinion is quite valid here.
Yes.
So when you say the ruling elite,
yes,
you definitely aren't talking about just the president.
Yes, I'm talking about those in charge of the decision-making process, those who are around the president and those around him, the legislature, the leadership of the legislature, and what they want. What are their interests? I think we have gotten to a situation where we must take a firm stand. Are we ready to fight corruption? If the answer is yes, then all those empowered with the duty to fight corruption must be supported, must be encouraged. For instance, I wouldn't pray for Ola Olukoyede to come in, only to be shoved aside in very, controversial circumstances.
If that happens, does that demonstrate to you that we are not fighting corruption or we are not committed to it?
I think it demonstrates to me clearly that we are not committed to it. For instance, I'm not saying that the headship of the anti-graft agency should be corrupt. No. If the headship of the anti-graft agency is corrupt, that sends a very dangerous signal. What I'm saying is that we must be certain that the headship is corrupt on proven allegations. Not because we want to shove anybody aside. For instance, I say it publicly. What allegation of corruption has been proved against Ibrahim Magu? I can say it for free. That man is one of the most, in terms of commitment to ideals, he's not corrupt. Ibrahim Magu is not corrupt. In the same way, Nuhu Ribadu is not corrupt. Those were elements who fought corruption with passion. And they were shoved aside. And we kept quiet. No white paper, nothing. And we kept quiet. So you understand what I'm saying? I told you, I appeared before Honorable Justice Salami Pale. And I threw an open challenge when I said my appearance for Magu was conditional. That if you show me proof that this man is corrupt, this minute I will withdraw my appearance. I repeated the challenge 3 times. Even at the conclusion of the proceeding, when I was addressing the panel, there was no allegation of corruption against Magu. That man was just innocently punished. Was just punished for doing his duty. You might say Magu was high-handed. You might say he didn't deliver in terms of welfare of staff, which are also critical. But nobody can accuse him of corruption. You understand what I'm saying? In the same way, you cannot accuse anybody of corruption. But what I'm saying is that this president, having appointed Ola Olukoyede as chair of EFCC, must support him to deliver.
I'm glad that you mentioned the other time that you checked with your colleague, who is the Attorney General of the Federation.
Yes, I checked
now, and he
I
said,
checked with him. I sought audience with him. The Attorney General of the Federation,
qualified.
Lateef Agbebensi. Yes. And he okayed the appointment of Ola Olukoyede.
Now,
and as the Chief Law Officer of the Federation, I stand by his decision. If you believe that what the Chief Law Officer of the Federation has said is wrong, go to court. But I think, and the court will interpret. And it's not just the literary rule of interpretation that is available to the judges. We have the golden rule of interpretation. We have the mischief rule of interpretation that looks at the mischief that the legislation intends to remedy and then address it. And of course, we have the purposive rule of interpretation. You don't just look at Section 2 in isolation of the rest of. What is the EFCC Act 2004 designed to achieve? To combat corruption, economic and financial crimes. Are you saying a lawyer is eminently not qualified? A lawyer understands all the terrain. He understands investigation. He understands prosecution. He understands adjudication. He understands the best practices about combating corruption. So it's not just look at that. I've looked at Section 2 of the EFCC Act.
Okay. So one thing that, you've spoken about this quite laudably, but let's bring in the entire, because it would seem like the federal government listened to your colleague, Mr. Femi Falana, when he talked about the Federal Character Commission, Federal Character Principle, that it has to come in, there has to be a balance. Are you satisfied with the appointment of the new chairman of the ICPC?
Well, for geographical balance, because let us face it, the entire 6 geopolitical zones in the country have people that are eminent, capable, of character to deliver. So appointments into public offices ought not to be lopsided. Apart from this, the man, Professor Bolaji Owosoye, whose tenure is about has done very well in ICPC. One of the most cerebral minds that you can think about.
But there are those who thought
But you see, if Olukoye is coming to EFCC and he's from the South, it doesn't make sense to also have the leader of the ICPC come from the South.
Okay.
You understand me?
Okay.
Because we have eminent people all over the place. But I want to salute Professor Bolaji Owasori for his stellar performance in the ICPC.
Okay.
And I believe that young man, I won't say young man, is my Oga.
Okay.
His services ought to be deployed elsewhere because he's a cerebral, a competent person.
Well, let me believe that.
And Adamu Aliyu is coming in.
Yeah. Okay.
He's also very competent because he's a senior advocate of Nigeria. You don't rise to the inner bar if you're not qualified.
Okay.
Again, if you see the ICPC, which is also agency, and there's no furore about the appointment of the ICPC chairman. Why should there be furore about that of the EFCC?
Okay, my colleagues in Abuja have questions for you.
Yes.
Chamberlain.
Well, yes, good morning. We'll come to you much later, but we've got Mr. Adebayo Ojo, who is a senior advocate of Nigeria as well, also a former Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice for Oyo State. He joins us virtually. Good morning, Mr. Ojo. Thank you for joining us on the program today.
Good morning, Chairman.
Well, do you still... I know Mr. Shitu has copiously said that all of this talk about qualification of the ICPC, the EFCC chair is needless because he says the man is eminently qualified, period.
I quite disagree with my learned brother, Mr. Wabu too, on that point. I also disagree with Mr. Femi Falana and Chief Ubani, who was your program yesterday. And let me say this, I give kudos to Daniel Bwala. He ably, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Daniel Bwala did justice to that provision of the law when he appeared on your program yesterday and adopt all he said as mine. And let me say this, I'm happy that Mr. Wabu too, SAN, has made it disclosure because he represented the new chairman, the new acting chairman of EFCC before the Justice panel when some of them were being investigated, including former chairman, Mr. Ibrahim Magu. And all of us know who Justice Isa Sulami is. He is one of the most incorruptible justices or jurists this country has ever produced. Look, let me ask. The positions of the law are very clear. The first leg of that act is that you must be either a serving or retired member of any security or law enforcement agency who must not be less than the rank of the ACP. If you are talking of or is equivalent, in equivalent, you have equivalent of the rank of ACP in the military. You will have also the equivalent in NIA or in all other security agencies. Look, what are we talking about? Are you now saying because the man served as the company secretary of EFCC, he is now qualified or is deemed to have possessed that level of qualification as required by the law? The answer certainly is no. And I'll give an example. An accountant or a director of finance and admin in the Ministry of Justice, no matter the level of experience, will help
Okay, Mr. Joe, we have a little challenge with your connection. We're hoping that we'll be able to sort it. But let me ask you, hoping that this goes through and you can hear us clearly. When Mr. Shitu started, concerning the second point you had made previously, he said that Mr. Olukoyede was never indicted. And you had said, we can quote you, that the man was indicted.
He was indicted by Isa Osami panel. But one thing I know is that no white paper has been issued by the government, but he was indicted. To say that he was not indicted is far from the truth. And it's just being economical with the truth.
Okay. I beg your pardon. On that particular point, I need to double check again with Mr. Shitu because...
Did he retire or resign from EFCC? Did Mr. Olukoyede retire or resign from EFCC? He was unceremoniously put out. I saw the way out of EFCC. Did he retire? Did he resign?
Okay, let's pose that question to Mr. Shitu. Mr. Shitu, could you address that directly?
Mr. Ola Olukoyede was never indicted by the panel. Mr. Ola Olukoyede appeared before the panel as a witness. He was never on trial. And at the end of it, before his appearance, he, alongside some other people, top officials of EFCC, were suspended, pending the outcome of investigation. Mr. Ojo, for whom I have a lot of respect, knows that in a panel of inquiry, what is central is the white paper. You cannot even sue the panel for any pronouncement. You can only sue on the basis of the white paper. As we speak today, there's no white paper, so there you cannot talk of any indictment. I was privy to the proceedings of the panel. I was there for almost 3 months. And
since the white paper has not been published, we cannot say he was indicted.
Yes. And then his suspension, he has been cleared of any suspension. He has been administratively
cleared. How did he leave the office?
No, he was on suspension.
How did he leave the office?
He was on suspension pending the outcome of the panel. He was never sacked. He was never dismissed. And so, if, for instance...
If there hadn't been... Yeah.
If an inquiry is going on and they say, okay, pending the outcome of that inquiry, certain persons are suspended. I'm aware that all the officers, some of the officers, suspended at the time, have been recalled. In the case of Ola Olukoyede, while the suspension was pending, another fellow was appointed as the secretary to the commission in the prerogative of the administration. So he was never indicted. His records are clean. In the same way the records of Ibrahim Magu are clean. And I challenge anyone to say to the contrary, where is any white paper? Where is any indictment? I don't think we should rely on speculation.
All right.
And when we are talking of reputations of individuals, we should be very careful. It can be anybody.
Okay, we'll go to break. When we return, I reckon Mr. Ojo will pick up the gauntlet as you've challenged him. So stay on with us, everyone. Welcome back. So, Mr. Ojo, Mr. Shitu had challenged you, saying no such indictment, on the contrary to what you had said.
And I stand by my position. But let me say this. The only point of convergence between me and Mr. Shitu is that this country is blessed presently with the kind of Attorney General of the Federation we have and the Minister of Justice, in person of Mr. Prince Latif Fagbemi is the best the country can get at this time. Because Mr. Fagbemi's appointment is a fitting one. He's not a man given to sentiment or emotion. He's a thoroughbred professional who I'm sure will really deal with this issue. And I believe me, and let me say this, that the Attorney General of the Federation, Mr. Latif Fagbemi, we take care of this matter holistically. And if Mr. Olukoyede's appointment is confirmed, then it means that the Attorney General of the Federation, Mr. Fagbemi, has the effect of that appointment. And I abide by it. Because I know him. is a man who cannot be compromised under any circumstance.
But Mr. Ojo, the matter is he's a public officer. It's in public service, so the public deserves to know if the right things were done.
No, Mr. Lateef Fagbemi is an attorney general for the people. That's what an attorney general should be. He's an attorney general for the people. He cannot be a mouthpiece of any government. He will get the government rightly.
When you say that
he will get the government rightly.
He was indicted, Mr. Olukoyede, so the impression people will then have is, okay, he was indicted, and then since the white paper has not been issued, does it then mean that upon that issuance of the white paper, they will then issue how indicted, because now that he's in this position, will there still be a white paper?
Chamberlain, let me say this. Mr. Asisu said, Mr. Olukoyede only appeared before that panel as a witness. I'm not asking, how did he leave? If he was a mere witness, how did he leave EFCC? Did he retire or did he resign? He should tell us that. Did he retire or did he resign?
He said he was suspended.
If he was just a mere witness, which means he was never on trial, just like Wabu, then how did he leave? Yes, in what circumstance did he leave EFCC? That's the issue, and which he needs to clear and tell us. Because we should place all the facts on the table.
Okay, just one more thing on this matter for Mr. Shitu. If you say, Mr. Shitu, this for you now, if you say that he appeared as a witness, he was suspended, there isn't any white paper, but part of the natural question too will then be, if he was cleared, as you say he was he reinstated? If he wasn't reinstated and being cleared, why wasn't he reinstated?
Thank you very much. Mr. Olukoyede never resigned his appointment. He was never indicted. What happened? A lot of illegality took place in the last regime. Okay, for instance, Magu that was suspended was never retired, was never dismissed. You know by public knowledge that he was eventually promoted from his status as Commissioner of Police to Assistant Inspector General of Police. And he retired by virtue of the fact that his tenure, his statutory age of retirement elapsed. So the question you should ask as a lawyer is, for instance, why would somebody who is suspended as chairman of EFCC and his suspension has not been converted to dismissal or retirement, why would they appoint Abu Rashid Bawa while that suspension is still subsisting? You understand what I'm saying? Those are illegalities that cannot be attributed to this regime, and it's not something that can be attributed to Mr. Lateef Fagbemi, Honorable Attorney. I agree with you that Mr. Lateef Fagbemi is eminently qualified, and the government would not have made this appointment if he did not sanction it. He's the Attorney General of the Federation. And I know, I have it on good authority that he sanctioned the appointment. He stands by the government on this appointment. And like you know, Mr. Lateef Fagbemi will not still be in government. He will have thrown in the towel if he doesn't agree with this. So I want to believe, and I believe, that Mr. Lateef Fagbemi has looked at the law from a broader perspective. I listened to Daniel Bwala, made very erudite submissions, basing his submission largely on the literary rule of interpretation. But that is not the only rule of interpretation available to the Judas. We have the golden rule, Mr. Ojo is aware. We have the mischief rule. We have the purposive rule of interpretation, where what you look at is the overall legislative intent. You look at the function the EFCC Act is designed to perform. Function of investigation, function of prosecution, intelligence gathering, law enforcement, prevention of corruption, and all those. And you say a lawyer is not qualified to do all of that? A lawyer who has served in the... And you talk of cognate experience. If you look at Section 2, 15 years cognate experience. Did it say 15 years cognate experience in that security organization? No. It said cognate experience. Olukoyede is over 22 years post-call experience as a lawyer. Mr. Adebayo Ojo is qualified to head the FCC. The man talking. the lawyer there, I know him very well. He's qualified to head it. So a lawyer is qualified to head the FCC. And if you look at it in relation to all other legislation like the ICPC Act, a lawyer has just been appointed.
Can you hear me, Mr. Shitu?
So I think we should, in construing a statute, we should look at...
Mr. Magu was reinstated and promoted.
Promoted?
In the EFCC, wasn't he?
No, it wasn't brought back to the EFCC.
Police.
The police.
The police.
Yes. He's not the assistant. At the time of his trial, he was a commissioner of police. Today, he's an assistant inspector general of police, with his integrity intact.
So why then the same thing happened to Mr. Olukoyede?
Olukoyede came in as a private legal practitioner. What he was doing all the while is to clear his name.
No,
I can also tell you
why
for free.
wasn't he reinstated?
Yes. He has been given a clean bill of health by the office of the Chief of Staff, the Secretary of the Federation. I'm telling you, I spoke to him, and I can tell you for free that he has been given a clean bill of health.
Was that made public?
If under the Freedom of Information Act, you can make your inquiries. And I tell you, President Ahmed Bola Tinubu would not have appointed him if he still remains indicted. He was never indicted. No white paper. I don't think we should rubbish reputations of people who offer themselves for public service without justifiable reasons.
All right.
Well, we understand that, this matter has now been, taken before a court of law. I do not know whether Mr. Ojo thinks that this is the way to go, given the controversy that has now greeted this matter. Some people think, look, shouldn't we just be more straightforward on these matters and avoid litigation on controversial matters? Or do you think that this is good to expand the scope? Maybe this is going to enrich the pool from which we can pick the heads of these agencies. Mr. Ojo, you first, and I'll take Mr. Shitu's response to it. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I was asking, I said this matter has now been taken before a court of law. It's now being presented before a court of law by a lawyer like yourselves. And some people are saying that this, the fact that it has to go to litigation to settle this controversy has its pros and cons. What's your take on it?
Not all matters will be brought to court. That litigation is needless. It's most unnecessary. We should have allowed the Honorable Attorney General of Federation to deal with it. Because this Fagbemi is eminently qualified, and more than qualified, to sort out this issue. And I believe, and I'm convinced that he will, that whatever his ultimate decision on this matter will be acceptable to all and speak, considering his antecedents, because he's a man of unquestionable integrity. Impeccable integrity. He's above board. Really.
You are saying that on the assumption that he's not been involved, because Mr. Shitu says he has it on good authority that he's been consulted on this.
What I'm saying is this: that discussion is needless. It is not necessary. To lawyers I do. To me, they are medical interlopers. Why must we want to court over that matter? In a matter of weeks, the AGF will come out and state the position. And believe me, nobody among all of us that have been discussing this issue, this subject matter, is as experienced as Lateef Fagbemi. None of us has his experience and has his depth of knowledge. Nobody can match him among all of us that will be discussing this issue. So why can't we wait and let us hear his opinion? And I said this, Lateef Fagbemi said, the appointment is in order. I abide by it because I know his antecedent. It's not a man give it to frivolities. It's not a man give it to sentiment and he cannot be compromised. He cannot. He will have looked at the law and state the right position of the law. I will abide by whatever decision that. So that litigation is needless. Some people are just seeking for attention.
It's interesting. I mean, if it has generated this level of controversy, dividing lawyers almost, I mean, you can find you'll find almost as many lawyers who are for it as against it. You don't think that the court should interpret Section 2 once and for all?
No, Mope, before you rush to court or before you fight, you don't rush to court. As that person who, as that plaintiff or the for that case, has he approached, has he written to the attorney general to inform him or to say that this appointment, I don't agree with it, this should be done, A, B, C, and C. No, you don't do that. You don't jump the gun. That's what we call ADM. That's why we are not making progress in our court. Some frivolous cases would have not to be there. That's why the court docket are clogged. And one of us will blame the judiciary for not being up and doing, whereas we are the problems, lawyers. Of what essence that? Why must any lawyer go to court over this issue that can be resolved over a round table? This will involve as so narrow. It is whether it's only one section, not one subsection of that section 2, whether Mr. Olukoyede is, by virtue of his work as the Home Secretary of EFCC in the past, is qualified to be considered a serving or retired member of law enforcement agency with equivalent to the rank of SCP. Pure and simple. If he is, so be it. And if he's not, he's out. So why must somebody now file unnecessary litigation? For what? To what end? To what purpose? I don't agree with that. I don't practice my law in that manner. That's why I said some people are just hiding.
Mr. Shito, do you agree with Mr. Ojo on this particular matter?
Ojo is entitled to his views, and I have a lot of respect for him. I just want to say that the president would not have made this kind of sensitive appointment without consulting with the Attorney General of the Federation. And I believe the Attorney General of the Federation, eminent Mr. Lateef Fagbemi, is in agreement with the president on the appointment of Ola Olukoyede. If he is not in agreement, he will have said so publicly. And I'm saying it for free.
Do you think that we should be requesting a statement on that on this particular, since it has generated such a huge controversy?
The Attorney General
has been drawn into this debate as to the legality or otherwise. But I think more pointedly, the question I'm asking is about, whether you think that the courts of law should have been invited into this matter. Do you think that this is certainly the way to go about it?
Well, anybody who approaches the court to ventilate his grievances over any subject matter is adopting a constitutional and democratic, approach. I will not condemn anybody for going to court to seek interpretation. And that will not be something outside what is proper under a democratic tradition. You can approach the court. But what I'm saying is that when we want to interpret any statutory provision, we should not just adopt the literary rule. There are other vehicles of interpretation, including the purposive approach to look at the entire legislative intent in order to discover whether a particular statutory provision is correctly interpreted or not. And I want to say it publicly that we should not indict the reputations of individuals without proof. I also want to mention it.
All right,
Yeah, let me mention this, and it's very important. We all know that Honorable Justice Ayo Salami is eminent. I have a lot of respect for him as former president of the Court of Appeal. And I think majority of Nigerians also have respect for him. Unfortunately, this report, no white paper. And so we don't even have the report anywhere. So we cannot say Justice Salami spoke one way or the other. And for my eminent my colleague, Mr. Ojo, he wasn't in the panel. I was in the panel. I was there for 3 months. I represented Magu. I followed the entire proceedings. And I know that Ola Olukoyede was never on trial throughout the panel. He was invited as a witness to make certain clarifications, which he made. And he was never indicted.
All right, so as we wind down, I mean, if the records are there for everyone to read, it's as good as being there. That's why records.
Yes.
So, but let me ask Mr. Ojo just one more thing as we wrap up all of this matter? Just about some of the narratives we hear that INEC is complaining that the courts, several cases in the courts are hindering them, their quest to have a smooth, credible elections for the forthcoming Kogi, Imo, and Bayelsa elections. Is this something that we all should be concerned about? Because we hear that, time and again, INEC raises these matters, questions about the courts, how they want the courts to be of huge help to them. Mr. Joe?
INEC largely focus to complain. That complaint by INEC is misplaced. INEC has done its bit. You've conducted election. So the next stage, you can't deny people access to justice. They have the right to ventilate their grievances in court. And like some people say, you can't slap a child and you don't expect him to cry. That's not possible. You've done your bit, allowed to do your own bit. It's like a judge who has a different judgment, maybe at the trial court, and who is now complaining that why are they taking my judgment court of appeal? It's their constitutional right. So INEC has performed its statutory role, which is to conduct the election and declare result. So the next step, those who are grieved have to approach the court to ventilate their grievances and file petitions within the time prescribed by the law. And it's also for the judiciary, for the executive tribunal, either to have or put that election, or order a rerun, or to declare the winning party, the winning candidate. As look at what happened in the case of Senator Wabu.
All right.
He was sacked by the panel, and the personnel was declared and tried to win of that election. So INEC complaint in this wise is most unnecessary. It's misplaced.
All right,
and I would call it a mere lamentation behind it.
All right, Mr. Adebayo Joe, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you, Chamberlain. Your last words on this. You wanted to make a statement about the ICPC. There are those who feel that it had been benign until now. We can do this in just a few seconds, maybe about 30 seconds or thereabout. There are those who think that ICPC had been benign and that the EFCC had to come on board because the ICPC wasn't as biting, as strong, as active as it was under Justice Akombi.
Well, you see, ICPC has a statutory mandate, and it has its own way of operations. I can tell you that ICPC has been as effective, just like EFCC, particularly under Professor Bolaji Owasoye. But for geographical balance, and because its tenure is about to expire, we need to bring in another hand. And Adamu Aliyu, by his pedigree, I think we also raise the stakes higher.
Okay.
So I wish him the very best of luck. And I think to the government, our commitment to the fight against corruption must be total. Emphasis now should be on asset recovery, because a lot of our funds, our money, our commonwealth has been stolen, and we need to recover them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Mr. Wahab Shitu is a Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure.
We're back right after now to look at what we need to do, as we have looked at what needs to be done in the fight against corruption. How about our elections? That's up when we return.
These are members of the Yaga Africa Election Observer Mission to Liberia, where they monitored the general election that took place recently. And they are holding this news conference in Abuja to brief on their preliminary report. On October 10, 2023, Liberians filed out to vote in the country's presidential election under the watch of several local and international observer missions. Members of the Yaga Africa Election Observer Group who monitored the exercise speak on their observations in this preliminary report.
We did observe a firm commitment on the part of the Electoral Commission to ensure transparency and openness in the management of the results collation or tallying process. The election officials, meticulously enforced the counting and results tallying procedures. And in cases where objections and queries were raised by party agents and observers on matters relating to inconsistencies or computational issues, they were addressed promptly in the full view of everyone.
Also, as part of observation, in addition to everything else that has been said, was also the role that the media played. You could see that they had a commitment to independence and fairness. And in the programs that were broadcast, which we were privileged to listen to on radio, we found out that a number of them, were very committed to peace, to fairness, and to patriotism.
Beyond these observations, the group is calling for some reforms in Nigeria's electoral system.
We're also recommending that INEC should review the format of ballot papers used in Nigeria to include photographs and names of candidates to improve the quality of electoral preferences and reduce, incidence of invalidated votes. But in addition to that the National Assembly also reviews the electoral law to address, some ambiguities in the results collation and transmission process.
INEC tries in other parts, but there is room for improvement that INEC can also learn. INEC cannot say it knows everything. Like the issue of the over-bloated register, I believe that it is actually over-bloated. INEC, like I said earlier, has to find another way whereby it can reduce the number of the people that are already dead that are on that register.
Elections in Nigeria are in a cycle of 4 years, and members of the Yaga Africa Group believe strongly that there is an urgent need to pursue those reforms in Nigeria's electoral system.
All right, welcome back. Samson Itodo joins us next, Executive Director for Yaga. Good morning, and thank you for coming on today.
Morning. It's good to be back in this place. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been really. And you're back in a different way.
Yeah.
Different. Good to see you in that time.
No, thank you.
But, just coming back from Liberia's election, the fourth consecutive one after the civil war. So some momentum there they seem to be getting. But here to talk about, yes, we've seen some of the recommendations you want INEC to adopt as a result of that election. But just give us a bird's eye view, some sort of background in terms of what transpired, because we're always looking to see how can we improve our own system here, no matter what happens.
Well, like you said, it's that Liberia's fourth consecutive election. That's a country that has experienced 2 consecutive civil wars. There are very few countries, in the world who go through this experience. And so it was great to see that the election was peaceful to a very large extent. But more importantly, it was an election of many firsts. So first, this is the first time Liberia was going into an election with a biometric voter register. So if you want to compare Liberia and Nigeria, Nigeria is quite ahead when it comes to our use of technology because of our biometric register, despite some of the gaps within the register. So it's the first time. They've always used a manual register, but this time, last year, they conducted a biometric registration. But at the same time, last year, they also conducted a national census. So they had a national census and a biometric registration. You can say they could do that because of the population, because they are just about 5.4 million people compared to Nigeria. But it was also the first election where Liberia was taking full responsibility for the conduct of the election. So what does that mean? First, in previous elections, the United Nations mission in Liberia was responsible for providing security. In terms of funding and logistics, you had the international community. But in this election, the Liberians took it upon themselves. They funded the election. They also provided the security. So the security architecture of the country managed the election. So to a large extent, it was a marked improvement compared to other elections.
I hope I don't break your train of thought, but just to piggyback on that matter. So could that have somewhat given them that kind of stability and trust if the UN had been doing that? So they had no choice to say, okay, look, We just need to follow through with this kind of examples. And if we had that kind of scenario here, handling security, it might have been a lot different what we get.
Well, I don't think so, because as a nationalist, I believe that nations and states should be responsible for their security, because why does a state exist? A state exists in the first place to provide security and deal with welfare or social conditions of people. So I think that states should be responsible for guarding and protecting themselves.
Yeah,
and so
I get that.
Even if you have that in Nigeria, it's no guarantee that you're going to have, a credible, or you have sort of non-partisan management of election security operations.
Okay.
I think what is critical is the fact that the Liberian people came to a point to say, hey, we can do this on our own. Because in 2018, the UN MIL left Liberia. But then there were also issues around the professionalism as well as the integrity of the security agencies to manage the elections, because they thought that, the Liberian National Police and the Army were going to be clearly partisan in managing the security. But to a large extent, we didn't see any
Why did they think that?
Because, of course, the state, the Army and the police are answerable to the president, who is commander-in-chief. And the president was on the ballot. And it's this, experience that we have about security agencies acting in a very partial manner when it comes to elections. And their loyalty isn't to the Constitution, but it's to an individual. And where the individual is a candidate in a party, the tendency is to protect the political interest of that particular incumbent when they are on the ballot, or even the ruling party, and not necessarily the entire state. So you see cases where security agencies have been used by incumbents to clamp down on opposition. You've used security agencies to shrink the civic space. But in the case, quite frankly, in Liberia, even though people had their concerns, and Maope, you were there, we didn't have cases where security agencies acted in a partial manner, like you will see in other climes, especially in places like Nigeria. There are some cases where we have seen security agencies hijacking and interfering with the electoral process, even though that has drastically reduced. But you see elements of that within our electoral process. But we didn't see that in Liberia. But to come to the point about the management of the elections, and I think that it's not just lessons for INEC or State Independent Electoral Commission, it's lessons for the Nigerian people and the Nigerian state. That this whole value of patriotism and love for country is not a mirage. That you have people who are expressing deep love for their country. And I say this all the time. If you have a political class that loves their country and loves their people, what you see happen within our public governance space wouldn't be the case. Because if you love your country, why would you want to force yourself on the people, even when they reject you? It clearly says that you're not actually going into public office to serve the people. You're going there for another objective.
So would it be right to then say that no matter the changes and amendments that we put in place and bring to bear on election day across board, ultimately it comes down to the people?
Absolutely. In fact, it comes down to the people. First, it comes down to the personal integrity of the people. And we have to, unpack this. Honestly, the current 2022 Electoral Act and the Constitution and INEC guidelines that currently enshrined, if we play by those rules, you would have elections that the outcome will not be questioned. You just have a political culture where politicians think it is impossible to win elections without a rigging plan. Politicians think that in budgeting for elections, you must budget for INEC. You have to compromise the INEC officials. You have to compromise security officials. You have to buy up election observers. There's just all sorts of malfeasance. And it's just the paradigm of our politicians. That they think it is not possible to win an election without a rigging plan.
Were there Nigerian politicians in Liberia too? to observe these things?
Well, we had two members of the National Assembly, the Senate Committee Chair on INEC, as well as the House Committee Chair on Electoral Matters. Very excellent, brilliant gentlemen, and we did enjoy our time with them, and the perspectives that they brought actually really helped us. And quite frankly, our political class need to learn to play this game by its rules. They need to learn to respect the will of the people and also show love for their country. If you love your country, you would not mobilize thugs to disrupt election or suppress voters. You won't prevent people from coming to exercise their franchise, at elections. You won't have political parties that unlawfully substitute candidates. You won't have an electoral system that is structured in a way that it prevents some people from casting their votes. And that's one of the recommendations that we have made, because the big lesson from Liberia, and it's not just Liberia, is the fact that journalists who are on election duty, election observers, the polling officials, the electoral officials, and security agencies were allowed to vote. If there is one country that values the right to vote, it's a country like Liberia, where they make those provisions. So for presidential elections, these individuals, citizens of the country who are registered, who have a legitimate right, to vote, are able to cast their vote anywhere for presidential elections. But for the legislative elections, you can vote anywhere so long as you're within the county, where you registered. In our own place, Timberlane and Maupe, I don't know the last time that you voted. Not because you're not registered, but the reality is on election day you can't vote because you are actually on election duty. And if you put the total number of Nigerians, eligible Nigerians who can vote, who are on essential election duty, the figure is somewhere close to 4 million. And where you have elections where the margin of lead between candidates is somewhere between 2 million, 1 million, in some cases even 11,000, that is enough, to actually substantially affect the election. But that's not even the premise. The premise is these are Nigerians, they have a right to vote, and the state cannot deny them their right just because they are performing a national service. The other recommendation was around the ballot papers, the structure of the ballot papers. And it's not peculiar to Liberia. In the last Kenyan election, in the Sierra Leonean election, these are recent elections, the format of their ballot paper had the logo of the party, the candidate image. In Liberia, they took it a step higher by even adding the image of the vice presidential candidate. And we believe strongly that if you change the format of the ballot paper and include the names, it will improve electoral preferences. It would also reduce, invalid votes. Because for Liberia, they gave, the people the option. You see, there's a philosophy that underpins these kinds of policy. It's a recognition of the state's responsibility to provide alternatives for people to express their choice, because choice is a critical value in democracy. And so you can mark on the logo, you can mark on the image of the candidate of your choice, or mark in the box that is corresponding to the candidate. And we believe strongly that if you change the format of the ballot paper, it would really help within...
If I remember properly, the chairman was there to observe the Kenyan elections.
Yeah.
When Samson was speaking, I said, Mark, where you were there, I said, I'm in trouble now. Because everything now I'm just going to be bearing witness. But it was quite an experience, and I don't know whether I should be on this side or on that side.
You can be on this side for today.
Samson, I think for me, it was a real privilege to have been a part of the study and observation mission in Liberia. And I found out that even though the delegation was small, it was interesting that Yaga didn't decide to go by itself. It chose to pick people from different sectors. What informed this? Is this a practice for you?
Well, so it is a practice. And the reason is it's a study and observation mission. And when you go to study, you're first, you're inquisitive. Because Yaga is an inquisitive organization. We love knowledge. We pursue knowledge. and we want to understand certain phenomena within our democratic process on the continent of Africa. And we're not just studying for studying's sake. We're studying because we want to foster reforms that are based on evidence and are based on knowledge. But as a civil society actor, we are not the decision makers. There are people who take decisions for changing our laws. There are people who have powers for electoral policy. And so you have legislators. It goes without saying that you can't have amendments to the Electoral Act without the chair and the committee of INEC in the National Assembly as well as the House of Reps. And so we selected these two gentlemen who were to be part of the mission because we believe that you cannot be making laws for elections if you are not on the field. And often when we come from the field and we engage with legislators, sometimes they think they have superior knowledge because they are practitioners. Yes, they do have some knowledge, you have to give it to them, but for those of us who observe and also are involved in the planning and the design of these processes, it's important to engage at that level. And we thought that it was valuable to take them to the field, at least go to a different country and also see how have we fared as a country. Nigeria has actually gone ahead. There's so many things to learn from Nigeria when it comes to elections. Yes, we're the giant of Africa, no doubt, but as a giant, we need to be humble to also learn from smaller countries, and that's why we highlighted that. But we also had other stakeholders, other civil society leaders who were part of the delegation. We also had people from the media, like yourself, and some of the contributions that you brought around the role that the media played. We thought that triggering conversations around this with a diverse group will deepen the quality of our engagement. And it's based on that we brought in this diverse group of people, because we only focus on three things. The first was electoral technology. The second was the election results management process. And then thirdly, we focus on the trends and patterns of citizens' engagement. So those are the three things we focused when we went to Liberia. There are other issues, but we just narrowed down on these issues because they are very relevant for our own context.
I was wondering, since both of you are back, so can we then say that all of this experience stands or subsists because the elections, they've not been called yet? So from what you saw, is it likely that they'll maintain the same temperament up until the end? Because if they're going to go to runoff, won't there be chances that, wait a minute, somebody might be under pressure to tilt something?
Well, so that's why the report says it's a preliminary finding. It's not a conclusive report on the elections because, as you noted, we expect perhaps today, the Electoral Commission, once it concludes its process, it will announce a runoff because it's clear that the incumbent and the leading opposition party didn't secure, 50 plus 1%. They're somewhere around 43% as of yesterday. So we wait for the Electoral Commission. And so this is not conclusive, but there are some aspects of the process that have been concluded. So things like election day operations, right? The pre-election environment. But they are currently in the tallying process. And to a large extent, the tallying process have been very successful. There were a few issues here and there, but it wasn't substantial to affect, the overall outcome of the elections. But the transparency, there's a foundation that was established for the transparency of this process. Okay. And it does appear that foundation is quite solid. And this is why every other superstructure that is built on that foundation is actually standing and looks very successful.
For me, I mean, apart from asking about the diversity and is this the first time you've had a diverse group like this observe elections?
Well, this is the first time at this scale. So we were in South Africa in 2014 with a smaller group, but this is the first time we have a high level. This is very high level because you had the chair of the delegation who was a former ambassador and also a former commissioner of political affairs at the Africa Union. You have yourself, you had the senators, we have also development partners who were part of it, and then also leading civil society organizations. So this is pretty much the first sort of high-level, very high-level delegation that we deployed.
It'll be interesting to see, what the future holds with that and how this, you know, eventually impact? Because I know that you're looking to not just impact elections in Nigeria, but also in Africa as a whole by sharing, you know, your reports when they eventually come out. But I was going to ask you, because when we come back from Liberia, of course we want to be able to paint and we want to learn only the good lessons from Liberia. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we'll be studying. But are there areas where you saw that, look, I think we've done this one well. We shouldn't go back here. Where are some of the areas that you think that Liberians might be needing to catch up with Nigerians?
I think there are a couple of places. The first one is the use of technology. Technology does have its issues, its vulnerabilities and challenges, but I think they can learn a lot on how we have used technology with our electoral process. We've seen cases where clearly they had the biometric register, but the accreditation process was manual. So you come with your voter's card, and then they check the register, and then your name is ticked. We believe that process, because it also slowed the process, was quite slow. If you introduce, a technological device to bridge that gap, I think it would help. And we believe that Liberia is incrementally using technology, because the voter's card looks like our PVC, although it had a QR code where you scan and then it takes you to the voters register that is accessible online. So we believe that they will introduce that subsequent. Actually, they would have, but due to budget cuts and then also the timing, they didn't deploy any device. So that's one aspect they can also learn, from Nigeria. The second, bit and something they can learn from Nigeria is to note that, yes, geographically, Nigeria has a larger population, has, a large geographical space compared to Liberia. But we feel, and this is, again, our respective view and something they can learn, it's about, the public engagement and those regular engagement with stakeholders, because INEC has weekly engagement with stakeholders, quarterly engagement. They can structure that to update the stakeholders on its plans, because the Electoral Commission had some issues with communication. It's not like the INEC is any better when it comes to communication, but at least with the stakeholder engagement that INEC has, which is regular on a quarterly basis, they can also have that to update, members of the public and stakeholders about their plans for elections. I think one thing they can also learn from Nigeria, it's about, citizens mobilization. They did very well because there's long-term investment. But when it comes to using social media to reach young people, I thought that they could have done better with, the use of social media.
Well, Mr. Itoro, if you can hear me, just 1 second.
For the election.
Yeah.
But there are also lots of lessons to also learn from Liberia. When you look at the results transmission.
Well, Mr. Itoro, just one quick thing, if you don't mind me.
So you move from the polling place.
Mr. Itoro, just one moment. Sincere apologies for butting in. And I'm actually very excited about the fact that you mentioned, citizen engagement is something that I believe that if we can do that well enough. You spoke to the political class the other time, and I sincerely agree with you. Malcolm should have been on your side speaking about the coverage of the elections, in Liberia. But there's something that I saw, and you may want to confirm it, about the style of government or style of democracy that Liberia is using. Is it the same kind of democracy we're having? Or because I think I saw somewhere talking about some kind of additional governance structure or style to their own democracy. Add that to what Malcolm told us about the length of years an elected official can stand, can remain in office in Liberia.
Well, interesting. I'm actually smiling because we had an interesting discussion, and these are internal discussions we had as a delegation about the tenure of office for legislators, and she was right that legislators serve a 9-year term. But in terms of the structure of governance compared to Nigeria, there's some fundamental differences. Yes, it's a presidential system. You have a president who is the head of government. You have one sort of national legislature or parliament. You have an upper house and a lower house. Now, so that's at the national level, and perhaps the only parliament, that exists within the context. Unlike Nigeria, where you have a bicameral legislature at the federal level and then a unicameral legislature at the state level. In Liberia's case, you don't have that structure at that level. And so citizens vote for the president, they vote for the senators, as well as the members of the House of Representatives who serve, a 9-year term, and then the president serves a 6-year term of office. In our climb, it's 4 years for the executive, and we have 4 years every elections, 4 years of 2 terms. There's a 6 years of 2 terms, which is pretty much 12 years, and that also impacts on the conduct of the elections and also the levels for the transmission or collation of results. Because you move from the polling place, which the equivalent is a polling unit in Nigeria, and then you go straight to the magisterial office, and there are about 19 magisterial offices in Liberia, and then it goes to the national. And to also note that one of the things that Liberians can learn from Nigeria is that at the final level of collation, because once collation or tallying is concluded at the magisterial office, then it goes to the national. At the national level, which is our own equivalent of the ICC, where INEC tallies the final result, you have party agents, you have observers. But at the final level, in Liberia, you don't have polling agents, you don't have observers at that final level.
So how does that impact?
That's something they can learn from Nigeria.
Mr. Todo, how does that impact on the conduct generally? Is there a lesson in that for Nigeria? I mean, I'm talking about the structure of government. How significantly would you say that affects the rancor-freeness or the lack of litigation in or otherwise in Liberia compared to Nigeria?
First, there are 3 things. One, it could impact decision-making, it could impact the cost of governance, it could also impact, leadership. And so let's deal with the first one about decision-making. You need to note that the population in Liberia is quite small. Liberia is just like, in fact, it's even to a large extent, okay, yeah, maybe like a state, because in the FCT, we are told we're over 5 million or about 6 million people. And so, that's one country. Because Liberia has about 5.4 million people. You can't compare governance in a small country like Liberia than governing a country with over 200 million people, 36 states of the Federation and the FCT. It is quite a cumbersome task. So in terms of decision-making, you can have accelerated decision-making in Liberia compared to a place like Nigeria. The second bit is about the cost of governance. We're spending so much, spending public resources just to govern. You have the proliferation of different agencies at different levels. Governors are appointing hundreds of aides and even thousands. You have over 49 ministers in the federal cabinet. You have governors appointing, special advisors. And so the cost of governance for us is very high compared to Liberia. But if there's one thing we can learn, from Liberia in terms of the structure of governance, is that level of transparency and public participation. And we think that it's some unique thing that Nigeria can adopt.
Well, I'll leave the last question to much later, because several people would always keep asking us, when you come back from this kind of mission, haven't seen there and here, is there hope? But look, thank you for coming.
There's hope,
Samson. So there you go.
Even if you don't ask, there is hope.
All right. So let's look at some messages that has come through now. Some of them. This one is from Dixon. He is concerned about this conditional cash transfer. So it's a pretty long one. Wait for it. He says, I commend President Tinubu for launching the conditional cash transfer through the SGF yesterday. But this might just be another waste of so much money on a project that may not help our economy. 15 million households receiving 25,000 naira per month amounts to 375 billion naira per month. For 3 months, that will be 1.125 trillion naira to be spent on unidentifiable households in Nigeria. If this is the reason for the subsidy removal, then we've missed it, because even the few families that may benefit will prefer subsidy. We don't have data in this country, so who are the poorest of the poor? Some politicians may have up to 20 families on the list. We saw too much waste of money on this same project last year, and we don't expect a continuation of it. A massive single-digit loan facility for SMEs and making the refineries work will rather done the magic, he says. The money is too much to be wasted on the so-called conditional cash transfer.
Well, you cannot ignore his point of view. But look at this one, Olagunju Oladele. He says the drama surrounding this administration's political appointment does nothing to solve the needs of the masses right now. Political appointments, especially when the recipients have questionable character, will also lead to chaos and poor governance. I'll also quickly take Asolo Alpha Cross. It says there should be a separate court to handle pre-election related matters to ease traffic in the courts and not frustrate operations of the electoral umpire. I think there's one more.
Yeah, but of course, as you can see, we are completely out of time. Festus Akimboyewa, we got your message, and we'll probably take it some other time. That's the show this morning. Thank you for the privilege of being a part of your morning. And Maokwe, again, welcome back. We will interview you one of these days. Amaya Makine, have a wonderful day.
Always here. Thank you. I'm Maokwe Ogunyusuf. Goodbye.
We'll see you tomorrow. I'm trained on yourself. Goodbye.